Welcome to the Moser on Manufacturing podcast, brought to you by Jacket Media Co. And now, your host, Harry Moser.
Hello, everyone. Lou Weiss from Manufacturing Talk Radio. Glad to see you all here today. I see there's a bunch of you. I have Harry Moser, who is doing the new show of Moser on Manufacturing. Harry, in case you don't know who he is, and I'd be surprised if you didn't, Harry is the president and founder of Reshoring Initiative, and he started that gig about the time we started losing jobs in America to overseas countries. So Harry has been a strong advocate about reshoring, and probably is responsible for probably about 1 million jobs coming back to the States. Is that a fair number?
Well, not other people played a role. Well, certainly, President Obama, Trump, Biden, everybody's helped. I would correct though that I founded the initiative in 2010, and we mainly started losing jobs around 2000. Around the time when China joined the WTO. So the worst job losses were 2000 to 2010, and then we came in 2010, and things continued to pick up and have done very nicely since.
We still only have we had 40 million people in manufacturing. We're down to 12 million in manufacturing, and we're 3 million short. And you're bringing more jobs back, or helping to bring more jobs back, as I am as well. But we don't have enough people. So why don't we get right to it?
Yeah. So the people issue is a problem, but it's a problem everywhere in the world. I've been at international meetings when country after country, developing countries, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and so on, get up and say we can't get kids to go into manufacturing anymore. They all want to become, they want to study history and philosophy and anthropology and sociology and stuff like that. And I even read an article with a Chinese factory owner saying that he can't get any workers anymore in China because everybody wants to go to university. So it's a worldwide disease, and I think we are recovering from that, and therefore I think we will improve in worker availability, skilled worker availability, better than most of the rest of the world.
Well, I think finally the government and activists such as yourself are helping that. Yes, we have skill shortage here, but technology has taken over where skills was a personal thing. It's now become a digital thing. However, that being said, with what's going on in the Ukraine now, we can pick up a lot of manufacturing blue-collar workers to come to the States and get into our pool.
Yeah, and in many cases, they will have had a better apprenticeship system than we do, and you'll find more skilled workers there. And I'm sure if they get over here, they'll be very appreciative and hungry and work their butts off.
Well, hungry for sure.
Yeah.
Hungry for sure.
Yeah.
Not much food over there. So regarding offshoring, how did it get so strong?
Yeah.
Tell us about it. That it came in 2000 and it's been improving ever since. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah. So really it relates to the trend in the strength in U.S. manufacturing, I think. And I've actually got a couple of slides. If we could arrange to
Sure.
have me pull them up. We should. I'm not seeing you yet. I had I had put down.
Technology is wonderful when it
Yeah,
works.
it's wonderful. The problem is I've got different things up on different screens. Um, Let me see if I can. There we go. I found you again.
Okay. So
So how do we? There we go. So I need to share screens. Can you give me authority to share screen?
yeah,
I- I'm not seeing anything for me for me to click on. You are
I,
viewing Lou Weiss's screen.
I
I don't see anything for me to share the screen.
all right. We'll have technical people take a look at that at another time. So you're just going to have to do the best with the English language as opposed to pictograms.
Okay. So thing I was going to say is, and I was going to show you that U.S. manufacturing has not done well. I mean, it's grown, but it's grown as measured by dollar value. And even with that, it's barely grown. It's grown an average of 0.7% annually since 2000. So just a bare bit. And if you looked instead of dollar value, if you looked at units of production, like steel, now the tons of steel produced per year is down 30% from 1970 to today, and aluminum is I think is worse than that. And as a percentage of the world's output, in the late 1940s we produced about 50%, 50%, now 18%. And if you adjusted that for price, because our value is higher because we have higher costs, we're more like 14% of the world. And to put that in perspective relative to other countries, China produces 10 times as much steel as we do. 10 times, eight to 10 times as much steel as we do. Now, some of it they waste. They build roads and buildings they don't need, but still, they massively outproduce us. And if you look at as a share of GDP and employment, uh, the share of GDP is down from 25% in 1970 to about 12% today, and share of employment from 27% to 9%. So you've just had a huge amount of decline in manufacturing relative to everything else that we do, and that you can't keep going on that way forever because we get too weakened as a country, and it needs to be corrected.
The Chinese stats you were talking about regarding steel, if I'm not mistaken, I think the number is that we import about 8% of their total, which really isn't a lot, taking into account how much they produce, number one. And number two, for us, in my opinion, for us to have imposed a tariff on the U.S. consumer because they buy from China, it's really an unfair tax, if you will. So we're not that much involved with them on the steel side.
Yeah, although um, they everybody knows that they overproduce steel because they've got a lot of these very primitive steel mills making steel, some low quality, and so they have excess quantity of it that they then do dump around the world, and
Right.
they do hold down the price here, which is good for someone who uses steel, but bad for a steel company. The tariffs are a two-edged sword. On the one hand, they help Nucor and the other steel companies increase their capacity, start new factories, whatever. Yeah. On the other hand, they hurt companies like yours that buy steel and either can't get it, like stainless steel now is hard to get, or the price is up, and to the extent that the price in the U.S. goes up, say by the amount of the tariff, 15, 20%, something like that, then your cost for steel is up relative to the cost of steel of a Canadian or a German or a Chinese competitor, and therefore those countries and companies can ship product into the U.S. at a lower price than you can make it for because they're starting with their key ingredient at a much lower cost. So it's a two-edged thing.
Yeah.
The right solution would be to have a tariff like a value-added tax that applies to all products, so not just to steel, but to everything made out of steel, and not just to aluminum, but to everything to everything that's being every good that's being imported. And if they had done a value-added tax and applied it to everything that's imported, then you wouldn't see that inequity that you experience with a high-priced steel.
How do you feel about quotas system as opposed to a tariff system?
I think let's say almost every other country in the world has a value-added tax, so it's a tariff, and therefore that has been proven to work, and therefore I would tend to go with that. If you can, but it's politically very difficult to get there because the Democrats don't like value-added taxes because unless they're done right, it raises the cost of living and low-income people suffer more, and the Republicans don't like a value-added tax because Republicans don't like any tax, and they're afraid that once it comes in at say 5%, within a couple of years it'll be 15 or 20%, and they won't be able to control it. So quotas, typically quotas tend to be short term. When we've had quotas in general, they've been for 2 years or 5 years while the industry gets its momentum going again. And I favor an industrial policy that's like the one reason China's done so well is because they take a 25-year or 50-year view, and they started 10 years ago on electric vehicles and 15 years ago on solar panels, and they said and chips, and they said we're going to dominate these technologies, whereas the U.S. does it piecemeal, a little here, a little there, and if you had 5 years of quotas, the company would be afraid to invest $1 billion to build a factory that maybe was going to get wiped out when the quotas were gone. So either have. And if you do quotas, then you still have to do quotas. Do you do it just on steel, or do you do it on things made out of steel? And so, to me, the value-added tax is by far the simplest way to go.
So why are we doing that?
I just told you, the Republicans and Democrats both hate it.
But that's what we got, is Democrats and Republicans.
That's right, but they got all the votes. But on the other hand, I believe that the general subject of industrial policy, the general subject of changing, optimizing for the good of U.S. manufacturing is a much more acceptable topic today. People are willing to talk about the things that we need to do. They don't all come to the same conclusion, and they don't all come to my conclusions. But they're at least it's an acceptable subject for polite conversation today, whereas 20 years ago it wasn't. And so we're gradually sort of stumbling our way in the right direction.
So looking at the output of the world's production and GDP and so on, where are we going? Where is is things going to continue growing? Is trade debt here in this country going to continue to grow? Certainly our national debt is growing that's doing wonderfully, 43 trillion or something like that.
I don't think it's quite that high yet, but it's headed there.
Yeah.
So I mean, it looks like we have budget deficits of $1 trillion or more per year going on indefinitely, and continuing to add more benefits and more expenditures that will cause that. And And at the same time, we have this $1 trillion trade deficit, and both of them weaken the U.S., undermine our economy, undermine U.S. manufacturing, and and eventually, if they both continue, eventually the U.S. will not be able to pay the interest on its debt. So imagine when we get to the 40 trillion, and if if the dollar weakens, not by our doing it, but because the market says the U.S. is weak, and interest rates on the debt go to 10%, then you'd have $4 trillion a year of interest on the $40 trillion debt. And right now our total budget is, I don't know, 2 trillion or something like that. So the U.S. would be bankrupt if that happened. And so allowing that debt to continue to grow puts us in a very vulnerable position. And from my viewpoint, the best way to deal with that is to strengthen manufacturing, is to reshore and bring 5 million manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. 40% increase. All those people working, paying taxes, their employers being really busy paying taxes, and the government not having to spend so much on safety net. And when you do all that, then the budget deficit comes down, and then we're more stable. So the best solution to all these things is strengthening U.S. manufacturing.
So we were talking about debt. Do you think that debt is ever going to be paid?
Well, I get newsletters from a lot of experts. People very smart on finance and the economy, and most of them say that the U.S. will inflate its way out of the problem, and that's what's happened in the past. There's been studies by guys like Ray Dalio, one of the smartest investment and economic guy, big like hedge fund guy, and he's written some excellent books and papers and videos, and he and others conclude that the problem that it's very hard to deal with it in the traditional way, like I would do it, but instead that eventually the debt gets too high, and in the past when that's happened in countries, they get inflation, and then you might have 40 trillion in debt, but it takes $1 billion to buy a gallon of milk, and therefore it doesn't take as much work, as much a percentage of the GDP to pay off that old debt in almost useless dollars. And we don't want to get there. And the best way to not get there, I believe, is to reshore.
Well, it's certainly something that will aid our country and aid our economy. What are some of the programs that are available today?
To programs available to achieve what purpose?
To bring the jobs back.
Bring the jobs back. Okay, so from a federal government viewpoint, there are some economic incentives available. I've got a paper that I made up that lists 5 or 6 ways that the government can help you. Okay, and some of them are the SBA, people like that. There's a couple of different federal banks, including the Exim Bank. So just about 2 weeks ago, the federal government announced that the Exim Bank, Export-Import Bank, that traditionally financed exports. So if your company was going to export $1 million worth of product to India or somewhere, the Exim Bank would insure that. And so if your customer in India didn't pay, the Exim Bank would pay, and so you wouldn't lose out. And so they used to just do that. Now they've said they will also loan money to companies to help the companies get better help the companies reshore, and therefore have the capability to export more. So that's an incremental source of income or of cash. There's agencies like Select USA, which is part of the government, that helps to encourage foreign direct investment. So Toyota, Siemens, people like that investing here. There's the MEPs, the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships, again part of commerce. Every state has one, and their function is to help small to medium-sized enterprises, companies like yours, to be more productive, more efficient, more profitable, to reshore, and to succeed. And there's several other like that. I'm going to send you that paper, and then you can decide if you want to post it or link it or something. You can
Yeah,
do that.
that'd be great. We'll post it right on your show screen.
Yeah. The other thing I talked about the federal government. The main source of funds has traditionally been at the local, regional, or state level. So the EDOs, economic development organizations, like in Ohio, Jobs Ohio, for example. If a company is thinking of expanding in Ohio or coming into Ohio to build a factory, you go to them and you negotiate with them, and they come up with a certain amount of money that they can provide either in cash or in training or in roads, to connect to your property or something like that, that can help, but it's never enough. It's never enough to justify bringing the work back, but it's enough to make the difference between coming to Ohio versus coming to Indiana. Okay.
One of the issues and problems about the reshoring and bringing jobs back, of course, is about the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing. And we've sort of been dodging around that question about how we become more competitive. Is that happening now? I mean, we are bringing jobs back. Are we becoming more competitive?
I'd say,
or more patriotic?
no, companies generally won't act for patriotic because the CEO can lose his job and the company could go bankrupt if they take a totally uneconomic decision. So I think to a certain extent we're more competitive relative to China because Chinese wages have been going up at 10% per year for 20 years. And now, where they were maybe 50 cents an hour 20 years ago, now they're $7 an hour. And at $7 an hour, it starts to become meaningful. And so part of it is China is less competitive. It's harder in China to find workers because their working age population is declining. But I think more so it's the perception of competitiveness. So from our beginning, our main pitch has been that companies should use total cost of ownership in making their decisions. They should, instead of just looking at the wage rate or the factory cost, they should include the duty and the freight, the carrying cost of inventory, the intellectual property risk, the risk of stocking out, the risk of China decoupling from the United States. So all these things, and you put those together, and so when you look at companies and what they've made their decisions, the surge right now, and the surge is huge now, is largely because of the disruptions that the companies have seen. They've sort of looked in the crystal ball and said, if I continue to be dependent, especially on China, but in general on Asia, on places far away, my risk of stocking out, my risk of not having product to sell to my customers is dramatically higher than I thought it would have been 5 years ago. And therefore, for some of the product, not all the product, but for some of the product, the expected value, the probabilistic best estimate of the future is that I should bring back a portion of the work to the United States.
Seems like a reasonable approach because that way you don't have to stand with one foot on the boat and one on the pier. You're bringing it back to a more reliable environment, that being the U.S. So our business cycles in this country run about 3 years, up and down, inflation, recession, good times, bad times. We're about halfway through a cycle. We've got about another 18 months to go of the cycle, but we were so negatively impacted by COVID and the people who decided to participate in the Great Resignation. The Department of Commerce came out with numbers saying that the last 2 years there have been more people going into their own businesses at a faster rate than ever. Well, that's all well and good, but what is not generally known is that 90% of all new businesses fail. So now we have a number that's 2, 3, 4 times greater. Is that 90% still going to stand? Which means people have to go back and get a job, learn new skills because they've been out of their marketplace for a while. So our problem is so multifaceted. You know, it's like a diamond. It's not like you have one major cut. You got a million things going on.
Yeah. In terms of I think what all this comes down to is the shortage of workforce. You know, the lack of availability of people, the millions of open jobs in the economy. And I've read some pretty interesting studies on that, and they ascribe a significant portion of it to early retirement. That the government gave people thousands of dollars. They were afraid to go out and go to work. Because they had the money, they didn't have to, and maybe they retired at 63 instead of 65 or something like that. So a portion of it was the early retirement. A portion of it is long COVID. So people who have had COVID, and I can't remember the number, but 500,000 or 1 million of them have significant they're not able to function as well as they used to because of the long COVID impact. So that's another 500,000 or 1 million. And what we're missing is a couple of million people. So those two, and then there's people that just got the money and they're maybe 25 years old and they're having a good time spending the money that the government gave them, and they don't see the need. And when the money runs out and they can't make the car payment or the rent, then they'll go back and find a job. And they're saying, hey, a lot of jobs out there. I can go back and find a job anytime. Why go now? Why not have some fun for another couple of months? So I think that as we get better at dealing with long COVID, that the retirees, people your age and my age decide that it's more fun to do this than it is to work than it is to sit on a beach somewhere. And believe in doing something, and who believe in what they do, like you do with radio and with your company, and I do with what I do, that people will come back, and I think that's the overall shortage in the country will be behind us, but manufacturing will still have an issue because even before COVID, for the last 20, 30 years, manufacturing has been hard pressed to find enough people. Even in recessions, you'll see help wanted signs outside a factory. Right. And so the problem now is that every other industry has the issue, and that even makes it harder for manufacturing to pull from a smaller pool of available workers. But I think the problem economy-wide will go away, and that'll take some of the pressure off manufacturing.
I think that some of the quote unquote solution to some of the skill gap issue is that you've got a couple of hundred people working for your plant. They're working on the floor, they're working in the office and so on. That I think that manufacturers need to face the issue that there are people in their employ who have either left or planning to, and they don't tell you about it. They give you a 2-week notice. The guy's been with you for 10, 15 years. So my way of dealing with that was to talk to the people up front, say, hey, what's your view on this? What are you looking to do? What do you want to do? Oh, you want to retire. When do you want to retire? 6 months. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we do a deal? You can retire in 6 months or maybe a year, and I'll give you a concession to stay, but perhaps you will do the training during your extended stay. So I'll give you a bonus. I'll give you a different or better work arrangement. You do some training, because once that tribal mentality leaves your company, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm.
You're really screwed. It's almost like starting your business all over again. And I know some companies that have been doing this and successfully. And what they find is that, well, maybe I'll stay a little longer than 6 months. maybe they realize that, they got to be home with the missus 24/7. Not that they don't love her, God knows, but, you know, do you really want to do that every day, the rest of your life?
Yeah, you can at least put that off by 5 years, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and the other possible thing I did, my last 3 years at George Fisher, machine tools, EDM machines, and so on. Last 3 years, I went from being president to chairman emeritus, and worked, half time or a third time or something like that. And so I still made a little money. I still got to travel, got to see my friends in the industry, got to be helpful to the company. But the other guy came in, he took over, did a great job, and so it was good for the company, good for me, good. Everybody won by it. I got a couple other things I wanted to cover during this
Sure,
session,
be my
and,
guest.
so one of the interesting questions, the economists will say that manufacturing decline is inevitable in a post-industrial society. That when a country gets to the point where it's been good at manufacturing like we have been, that inevitably it becomes a services economy, and then you buy your stuff from somebody else. You let the Chinese make it, so to speak. And and I say that's not true. So if you compare our 12% of GDP is manufacturing. In Germany, it's 23%. In Japan, it's 19. In South Korea, it's 29%. So these other countries, especially Germany and Japan, incomes just as like ours, just as advanced as we are, and yet dramatically higher percentage of manufacturing as a percentage of the GDP. So it's not inevitable that it happened. It's only happened because we've let it happen. Um, the In terms of the trade deficit, it's been horrible. It's $1 trillion a year, and that's 5 million manufacturing jobs lost. We now import more than we produce. So if you look overall, you say, are we self-sufficient? We import more than we produce. So we're nowhere near self-sufficient. The and it isn't just China. I mean, China's been very aggressive. They've been very smart and very assertive and cheated. All those things. But we have a trade deficit with 9 of our top 10 trading partners. So France, I think France, Italy, certainly Germany, but big countries, the same kind of incomes we have. Not You wouldn't have thought some of them were as good at manufacturing as we are, but we've got trade deficits with them. Only with the UK of our top 10 do we have a trade surplus, and they hit their industrial peak 100 years ago or something like that. And if you look at our exports and our imports, you look at where we're strong. For exports, we're strong in a couple of areas like defense and commercial aviation and things like Caterpillar. But other than just a few products like that, we are largely a commodity exporting country. And we import the high tech stuff. We import the laptops and the servers and the medical electronics and all that kind of thing. So if you look at our profile in terms of exporting and importing, we look more like a developing country than we do like the leading country in the world. So there's a lot of change that could be made to recover our manufacturing strength.
How long do you think it's going to take for us to get back to where we should be?
Well, 20 years as a minimum, because the key difference. If you say, what do we need? We need like engineering. Well, we're pretty good at engineering. So that's not, we need to train more like the Germans do, but not so many more. If you look at factories, and like if you wanted to build a whole new factory, in a year or two, you could build a whole new factory, get all the equipment, get it up and running, and be okay. The big problem is the people. To go from where we are today with like 1 million shortage, and with not many high school kids deciding to go into apprenticeships, to go from that to where something like Germany, where 60% of the high school kids go into an apprenticeship versus 5% here.
Yeah.
To make that's a big society. the high schools, a big chunk of the high schools are going to only have half as many students because the kids are going to be apprentices. The universities will have their employment dropped by a third. They're going to be fighting this tooth and nail because that's their market, so to speak. So you've got huge constituencies in our economy that are going to resist all the things that should be done to make the U.S. competitive. So it's not going to be easy, but if we don't do it, then we're going to continue this long-term slide. And so we need, from the federal government, we need industrial policy, which includes developing the skilled workforce that we need.
You know, you brought up a good example when you were talking about Japan being one of the leaders in manufacturing, along with Germany. Japan, though, Second World War, they lost a whole generation of men. And that's why they were the inventors and producers of robotics. And to this day, they are very robotically run. Mm-hmm. And they're the number one. And here, our fear is robots are going to take our jobs. So we're going to lose more jobs that way. But yet it worked for Japan. Japan is very successful.
Yep. And we're in the same shortage of at least manufacturing workers that they are, probably worse. If we were an island and we didn't import and export, if we had to be self-sufficient, and then if you dramatically increased automation, everybody might have more time to lie on the beach under the palm tree. Okay, so you wouldn't need as many work hours. But given that we compete with the rest of the world, especially China, places like that, how well we automate, how productive we are, is a key determinant of how competitive we are, whether we're price competitive and delivery competitive. And so we say that we will lose more jobs to Chinese automation if we do not automate than we will to U.S. automation if we do automate. So it isn't automate, tax the robot, like Bill Gates said, tax the robots. No. Subsidize the robots. To bring the robots on, because that will, and it isn't to get rid of workers and save costs. It's to have the same number of workers produce 3 times as much, so that we can increase our output and be able to bring back that 40% that's now offshore.
And bring your costs down.
And bring your costs down, and your delivery, quality, and everything else. And bringing that cost down is what will enable us to bring the work back. And bring the work back and raising the utilization of your existing equipment will help to bring the cost down, because you spread the burden rate over more units.
I do have one problem about robotics. I don't like going into a restaurant and the machine comes up to me and says, "Hey, bud, you come here often? How can I help you?"
On the other hand, I was in a restaurant a month ago, 3 months ago, and they had a nice little control panel on the table, and you could put in orders and whatever, and maybe you could call the waiter because you want the waiter to come over and bring a bill or something like that. So I spent a fair amount of time in restaurants waiting for the waiter. Right. Whereas that robot or that control panel, they're going to be there. They're going to be ready when you are, and they don't take a break. No potty breaks, no anything else. And so I'm willing to have some a nice mix of automation and still a human.
Okay.
A team.
Harry, before we wrap up this session, I'd just like to ask if you have any other points that you want to touch on.
So I'd say if you look at this weakening of manufacturing and the trade deficit, there's a role for consumers. They say they prefer USA made product, but they settle for what's readily available and cheap. Companies source offshore based on price, and they would reshore 20% if they used our total cost of ownership system. They should invest more. They should train more. The government needs an industrial policy. They promoted college for all, and as a result, we lack price competitiveness. So there's a role for everybody in doing this, and we're going to get into all those subjects more in the ensuing session. So we invite everybody to come back for the show.
Harry, thank you for being on the show today. Very enlightening. And by the way, we are going to be posting a article that Harry had written, and it will be posted when the show is up, and you'll be able to get further details, a deeper dive into the discussion that we had today. So thank you very much, all, for spending the time with us. Harry, thanks again.
Hi, Lou. Always fun. Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank
Yep.
you.
Bye-bye. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for listening. For more information on this or our other podcasts, visit jacketmediaco.com.